3 teenagers in Arkansas were convicted of a devil-worshipping ritual that took the lives of 3 little 8-year-old boys in the woods. But were they really guilty? I know I've covered cases with children in the last few videos that I've done, so I'm sorry about that. I won't in the next one. So massive trigger warning, we're talking about children, and it's graphic and it's so upsetting. It's not easy to listen to, so if you think that this is going to harm your mental health in any way, shape, or form, please skip this video. I will see you in my next one. Take care of yourselves. Your mental health matters. I love you. On May 5th of 1993, around 7 p.m., authorities received a call from Mark Byers. He was calling to report his 8-year-old son, Christopher, missing. Christopher, along with his 2 best friends, 8-year-old Stevie Branch and 8-year-old Michael Moore, had last been seen riding their bikes together near a wooded area called Robin Hood Hills in West Memphis in Arkansas. Putting 2 and 2 together, they quickly realized that all 3 boys had not been seen in a while. Like I said, the call first came in around 7 p.m. Authorities responded, headed over to Robin Hood Hills to begin looking for the boys, but 30 minutes passed and then 45 minutes and then an hour. Officers searched through the night along with family and friends and neighbors, but they found nothing. The following day, an officer noticed a little boy's shoe floating in the creek. When he got closer, a human body floated to the surface, and shortly after, the other 2 bodies were discovered in that same creek. All 3 boys were deceased. Their bodies were covered in wounds and injuries. They were not wearing anything, and their hands and feet were tied. Their bikes were also found nearby, tangled in the creek and the trees. Each boy had his right hand tied to his right ankle and his left hand tied to his left ankle. It also appeared that one of the boys had his lower region cut off. It was believed that SA had taken place, and Stevie also had a lot of skull fractures. The autopsy later showed that Michael and Christopher both had over 60 separate injuries and Stevie had around 20. It was horrific. My heart breaks for those parents because the moment it was confirmed that their little boys were never coming home was the moment that their entire worlds were flipped upside down completely. Now, the work of the West Memphis Police Department has been heavily scrutinized, in part because of the way they treated the crime scene. It was not properly secured or processed in the way that it should have been when you have a crime of such magnitude. For example, the length of time their bodies had been left in the water obviously played a big part in the condition of the bodies. It's also been said that detectives removed the bodies from the water hours before the coroner arrived at the scene to recover them, which affects the investigation a lot. The fact that the bodies were left in the water in itself makes it harder to determine certain details when trying to figure out what really happened. And it was their belief that certain things happened when in reality they could not say if they did or did not happen with 100% certainty. I'm not telling you what to believe, by the way. I just want to give you all the information that's out there. Apart from that, the crime scene overall was just not preserved in the way that it should have been. Crucial pieces of evidence were not taken into consideration. People who lived in the area were not interviewed. Call it what it is. It was a very sloppy job. The small West Memphis Police Department were way in over their heads, and they were not really accepting help from bigger police departments with bigger resources. Add to that the fact that the public was on them to solve this case, to figure out what happened, and to put the people responsible behind bars. So not only were they acting like they didn't really know what they were doing, they were also feeling the pressure from the public to solve this case ASAP. So what do? It feels like they go out and try and find a person that they can that could make sense, and then revolve the case and the evidence around that person to make it fit in the story in the way that they want it to. Right off the bat, investigators decided that this was a satanic ritual, and they worked off of that assumption. 18-year-old Damien Echols was who they set their eyes on. Damien has been described as an outsider. He didn't really have any friends. He was into the gothic sort of vibe. He usually dressed in dark clothing. He liked listening to heavy metal music. He also often read about spirituality, witchcraft, and the occult. He had a very rough upbringing, instability at home. He had dropped out of high school and had a history of mental health struggles. Because of that, back then, people considered him to be different. But in the eyes of authorities, that also made him the kind of person who would be capable of committing this crime. So investigators start looking into him, and they very quickly also focus on his friend, 16-year-old Jason. Jason was known to be a good student. He did share some similarities with Damien when it came to the kind of music that they liked and different similar interests. Both boys also had a history of petty crimes. They had been arrested previously for things such as vandalism and shoplifting. So solely based on those facts, because they had a history of petty crimes and they were considered to be socially different, within only a couple days of the crime, the WMPD decides that they are on the right track with these boys, even though there was absolutely no forensic evidence whatsoever tying them to either the 3 victims nor the crime scene. However, their suspicions only grew when they brought in Damien Echols for questioning, and he pointed out certain details about the crime that had not yet been released to the public. They took note of that. The third name that kept being brought up in their investigation was 17-year-old Jesse Miskelly. Jesse wasn't a friend of Damien and Jason's, but they knew of each other other, they were acquaintances. Jesse had also dropped out of high school and he was known to have intellectual limitations. He had an IQ that was considered to be below average, and it made it difficult for him to fully understand complex situations and or to resist pressure during questioning. So when he was brought in for questioning, instead of providing him with someone who could be there to make sure that he was fully understanding what he was being asked, he was interviewed for 12 hours with no lawyer, no parent, no one there to assist him. At the beginning of his questioning, he says, "I had nothing to do with these little boys. I don't know what happened. I don't know who did it." But as hours passed of him sitting in that chair being pressured to answer leading questions over and over again, Jesse eventually says that he does know who did it. And he names 18-year-old Damien Echols and 16-year-old Jason Baldwin, and he says that they did do it as part of a satanic cult. And then he eventually says that he played a part in it himself as well. He says that on May 5th, he met up with Damien and Jason. They all walked to Robin Hood Hills together when they saw Christopher, Stevie, and Michael there on their bikes. He says that Damien then called the three little boys to walk over to them to cross this bridge sort of area, walked them over to an even more isolated area when Damien and Jason ambushed them. Jesse claimed that he just watched as Damien and Jason used not only their hands but also sticks and eventually a sharp weapon to inflict the injuries on the boys. He also mentions that one of the little boys, Michael, tried to run away, but that he caught him and walked him back over to Damien and Jason. Afterwards, he says they tied the boys and walked them over to the creek, which is such a sad and scary thing to imagine. However, his confession was all over the place. There were certain things that were not making sense or were not adding up. He would say one thing and then change it, say another thing, and right after confessing, he immediately recanted his confession, saying that he was not understanding what he was being asked and saying that he was very scared of the police officers that were questioning him. And I know this is a massive piece of the story, don't worry, we're going to talk about it further, but putting aside who committed the crime, someone did. And that's so awful. 3 8-year-old little boys probably crying out for their moms. The image of it haunts me in my sleep, but that was their reality. Based off of some of the injuries the boys had, investigators theorized that a sharp weapon was used. So investigators then think, okay, we need to find the weapon. The first place they go looking for it is a lake directly behind where Damien Echols lived. And they find it. A lot of people believe, I would say most people believe, that the weapon was planted there purposefully by authorities to have some sort of physical evidence. Because let me remind you, there is nothing at all tying the boys directly to the crime scene other than Jesse's confession, which he took back immediately. Jesse Misskelley stated that although he was read his Miranda rights, he did not fully understand them, yet the Arkansas Supreme Court ruled that he did understand them and that his confession was voluntary and not forced. So despite having no evidence tying these boys to the crime, all 3 of them were arrested and very quickly convicted. Damien Echols was sentenced to death, Jason Baldwin was sentenced to life, and Jesse, despite the fact that his statement was what prosecutors leaned on most to use against Damien and Jason, was sentenced to life plus 40 years. Throughout the following years, all of them made appeals and every single appeal was denied. And people of the public began paying closer attention to this case, thinking, are these boys guilty? Like, really? What is there to say that they did do it? It was crazy. Documentaries started being made about the case, movies, more and more people were talking about it, big celebrities were speaking on it, all agreeing that these teenagers were being punished more for the way that they looked and dressed instead of for what they had actually supposedly done. And